Slowly, the young man ripped up the second attempt into tiny pieces, dropping the shreds of notepaper onto the mucky floor. He dragged dirty fingers through his greasy hair as a skinny pink sow snuffled at the paper and began to chew. From the doorway of the house, the woman wiped the last tea time saucer and watched him. She'd saved some of the leftovers on a plate, covered over with another tea towel in case her husband spotted it.
Slops for the pigs. He gets something later, when he's finished what I've given him to do. Useless, lazy, good for nothing.
Well, finished or not, he was still having some of the cold bacon and skin from the rice pudding. There was still enough for the pigs. If you didn't feed him, he wouldn't work properly. That was the point of him, wasn't it? She had given him the paper and a stub of pencil earlier that day when he'd come to the house asking for them. It was an unusual request. Pig workers didn't usually ask for writing material. They couldn't usually write. He had asked very politely. His shadowed, dirty face, half afraid, reminded her of her youngest. She hadn't asked what he wanted it for, but she'd watched him all afternoon, writing or trying to write, completely unaware of the half-dozen piglets squealing round his ankles and tugging at the frayed edges of his ragged trousers. Strange trousers, now you came to think of it. Dirty and stained, but once a good pair, a well-made pair. Pig workers didn't usually have good clothes. When her husband had first taken him on, he hadn't been much good, dropping the spade and tripping over buckets. Now, a month later, he still wasn't much good. Not a natural pig worker, not a natural any sort of worker. She watched as some of the torn shreds blew over the pig pen wall. I wonder if he'll manage to finish whatever it is he's writing, she thought. He'll need more paper if he carries on like that. She picked up the notebook from the windowsill and pulled off a couple of sheets from the spiral spine, then, picking up the tea towel-covered plate, walked towards the pig pen. She hadn't meant to creep up on him, but the young man obviously hadn't heard her until she'd practically reached the wall. He leapt up guiltily and grabbed for the spade, sending a bucket tumbling and piglets squealing for their mother. I'm sorry, I didn't see you. I've almost finished, he said, frantically sweeping the pile of pig poo nearer to the gate. Just this bit to do. The woman looked down at the mucky pile and bent down to retrieve a tear of paper. Oh, that's just rubbish. He grabbed at the paper and stuffed it into his pocket. Don't touch that, you'll dirty your apron. But she'd seen the word father written across it. She looked up into the young man's anxious face. He was so like her Ben, the same sad dark eyes and furrowed brow. Was it father that caused such a look? It had been for Ben. I wasn't prying, she said. I just brought you this. And she held out the plate of food. His face softened as he carefully took it from her. You're very kind. They both looked at the pile of greasy cold bacon swimming in lumpy rice pudding skin. You might need this too. She held out the paper, but his face hardened. Extra paper was not needed. Perhaps his task had been too great. What could you write to father when you worked in a pig pen? Well, I'll leave it here in case you want it later. And she set the paper on the pig pen wall, securing it with a rock. The young man watched her, an uneasy frown hurrying back to his face. I don't think... Her Ben had looked just the same, caught between his pride and a painful hope. She remembered the hastily stuffed case and bulging pockets as he faced her across the kitchen table. Ben, your dad didn't mean it. You know he loves you, and the farm will be yours one day anyway. I said sorry, and he flung it in my face. One lousy weekend away, that's all I had. Every day I've slaved away in this stinking hellhole. One lousy weekend. Well, he can shove it. I'm not creeping and tiptoeing round that man any more. He had stormed from the room, knocking over a bucket of pig slops by the door. That evening she'd raged at her husband, pleaded with him to go after the boy and call him back. But it had been useless. He'd hardly listened to her, shutting the door on her protests, his pride even greater than the love for his son. The young man had finished the slops and, embarrassed, returned the plate. Thank you. I'll finish the sweeping now. Just go. She hadn't meant to speak. He turned, confused, and followed her eyes to the torn strip of paper poking from his pocket. Guilty? Embarrassed? She couldn't make out what his face seemed to be saying. But then it softened, and he turned back to the pig pen, grabbing his filthy jacket from the wall. Here, you'll need some money for fare. Wages. He smiled at her, a tremulous smile, then turned towards the track that led to the main road. Gathering up the plate, she walked slowly back to the farmhouse. Better wash this and clear up the kitchen before her husband returned. He wasn't going to be too happy about another worker disappearing. Twice the work now that Ben had gone. Well, serve him right. At the kitchen door she looked back. He had gone. She thought again of Ben, and her mother's heart ached. But for this young man, well, perhaps his father would be a little more understanding.